I'm Kelsey Wingel. I'm the Associate Paintings Conservator at the Yale Art Gallery.
I'm Mark Mitchell. I'm the Holcomb T. Curator of American Paintings and Sculpture. So if we turn now to the painting, I think that's kind of the invitation today, is to think about why this painting and why this painting is so important and why we should be spending time with it and on it to really return it to its original strength and power. And I feel like that is significantly because this is a painting that is viewed as an icon of early American art, this sort of self-fashioning of an American identity, someone who's not an aristocrat, not lavishly dressed, not with the powdered wig and the kind of look of the late 18th century, but instead a man in sort of very demure homespun, sitting in a very simple Windsor chair. The perception about the chair is that it's a choice that was made very conscientiously because it is in a Philadelphia style. And so it records or carries on the sense that this man has just been in Philadelphia, where he was helping with those first steps towards independence. This is before, we're in 1775, we think, so before the Declaration of Independence. But he's already been a part of that first chapter in the first Continental Congress. And he's come back and he's bringing with him a sense of this experience and wants to memorialize it in a portrait. And he turns to this young artist, Ralph Earl, who has himself come from Massachusetts and this is his earliest known painting, or about his earliest known painting, and one that really provides a sense of his ambition and aspiration as an artist. Do you want to talk a little bit about the painting? Yeah. Tell us a little bit about what you see when you look at it and help us to kind of travel through it.
When I look at this portrait, I think so much about the strength of the sitter himself. Roger Sherman sitting in this empty room with a shaft of light that falls on his figure and everything else in shadow. And I think about that Ralph Earl, the artist, he was known as a loyalist. And you think about these two men on the opposite ends of this spectrum. And at this moment in 1775, when we believe the painting was created, was such a pivotal moment in American history. And when you look at this painting, as Mark mentioned, this is an early painting by Ralph Earl, one of the earliest known and one of a few that we know that he painted before he went to London. So in this first American period, we see how much natural talent he has as a portraitist and how strong his painting skills are. There's an incredible amount of skill in his handling of the paint, as well as fine and beautiful details in the colors of the shadows beneath Roger Sherman's shoes, in the way that the shadows are cast on the floor, and in that remarkable presence he was able to capture in Sherman's portrait. We feel that we do know this man and this face. It does still speak to us 250 years later. This is an oil on canvas painting, which means that Earl would have stretched a piece of canvas to a wooden frame, which we call a strainer at this time, and then prepared that canvas with several layers of what we call a ground, which is meant to reduce the absorbency of the canvas, establish the tone for the painting, and the surface for the paint layers themselves. In this case, Earl seems to have used at least a double ground, perhaps a triple ground, beginning with pink, then blue, then a very light tan color, which is a very interesting stratigraphy. We don't know much about Earl's early training in painting, but the beautiful handling of his materials suggests to me that he may have had some experience with decorative painting or perhaps other lost portraits that we aren't aware of before he painted this work. And the green in particular, I think, is one of the most beautiful aspects of this painting, the most beautiful pigment that he used. It is a copper-based green, we have learned through analysis. And this would have actually been used in architectural and in furniture paint at this time. So it's fun to think about Earl using paint that would have been used to paint a chair. Earl's use of his materials is quite economical. He carefully planned the composition. We haven't found evidence of underdrawing, but he clearly planned where he would paint the figure of Roger Sherman, because we can see where the paint doesn't overlap, but rather leaves a space for the figure himself. And so he had quite a good idea about where he was going to position Roger on the canvas before he began to paint. We haven't found much evidence of compositional change except for in Roger's right hand, the hand that rests on the arm of the chair. We can see a slight shift in the fingers of his hand, which used to be slightly more inward, which is a very small but significant detail for Earl to have changed the position of that hand during the painting process. From our analysis so far, there's much that we will be doing to further analyze and understand Ralph Earl's materials, but what we have learned so far is that he was using mostly earth-based pigments, as well as vermilion, which is a mercury-based red pigment, to paint Roger's suit, his beautiful garnet-colored suit, and a copper-based green pigment to paint his chair. So these would have been typical pigments in the palette of a late 18th century painter.
I think one of the things that I would like to highlight is the ambition of this treatment.
Okay.
This is a big painting.
Yeah.
It's 5.5 feet tall. It's 4 feet wide. When you come up to this object, it's not as big as you are, but it's pretty big. And there is a sense of ambition in the painting, and now ambition in this incredibly challenging treatment that you have ahead of you. But I'm also struck by the physical nature of it. There is a sort of awareness of history there, and the object has had so much treatment through time because people knew it mattered.
Yeah.
It was important to the family to take care of it, so they had it conserved at a time when conserving paintings was not a very common thing. There were not a lot of conservators around in the 1860s and 70s.
Yeah.
To seek somebody out to fix up the painting, yes, it had an obvious damage or two, but nevertheless, that was a big undertaking.
Yeah.
For the family to step forward and say, in 1918, we want to pay to have this painting conserved as it arrives at Yale so that it can be at its full strength when it comes into the collection, recognizes the significance of it to the institution. And then we have these two additional major treatments in the mid-20th century by the museum, one of which was around the bicentennial, I think.
There was
the Boston
the 75 one. Was Morton Bradley. Then there was a Boston one in 1928.
28, thank you.
Yeah.
So 28 is when we're about to open the old Yale Art Gallery building. And 75 is, of course, the cusp of the bicentennial, when the painting was in huge demand for all kinds of historical events. It was requested for a loan for the opening of the National Portrait Gallery in Washington in the late 60s. It was everywhere. It was these requests in the object file are amazing because you just see every museum director in the country writing to request the loan. And so that treatment, trying to stabilize it, putting it down on aluminum, the whole idea was that you were never going to have to deal with this again because it was there forever. This was a permanent fix. And now we have this moment of retrospection to look back over all of those changes, thanks to new technologies that we have available to us to really understand, as you were saying before, the layers of the paint surface, the series of treatments and their consequences to the aesthetic impression of the painting. And now to try to decide what is the best strategy going forward. This will be a multi-year treatment. It will be incredibly involved. It will involve you and I think several other colleagues, conservation scientists, hopefully me a little bit.
Definitely a lot of you.
There will be a many sort of forks in the road through this treatment, trying to understand all those chapters of the history of a work of art, and now how to approach a new generation, a new story, a new sort of context for this object going forward. And I feel like that's kind of our invitation now, is to think about it as where we've been and where we're going, knowing that its significance is only growing in terms of the story of the country. And I feel like the painting itself preserves such a sense of the richness of its original aesthetic power that we really want to be able to, as you were saying before, bring forward the richness of the room, of the space that he inhabits, as well as the richness of his figure, his costume that tells us so much about who he wanted to present himself as, the chair that sets us in the context of Philadelphia, the space that's right there on Chapel Street, the sense of being here and seeing the future of a country on the eve of the revolution. The revolution was already happening in 1775. And for Sherman himself, who apparently must have commissioned it because it stayed in his family the whole time, we have no record of anybody else commissioning it. He clearly recognized that this was sort of styling and preserving a moment in history and of his journey for us to kind of continue to look at and understand. And now for you to help us to protect and to help us see more fully as we move into this next phase of history and now facing the semi-quincentennial in 2026.